Senator Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move an amendment, the amendment circulated in my name. Okay.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amongst other things, my home state of South Australia. I like starting a speech with my home state of South Australia. It just gets me off on the right foot. But my home state of South Australia, amongst other things, is blessed with significant uranium deposits. And on a per capita basis, we perhaps have the most in the world. Let me mention a former State Labor MP, Mr. Norm Foster, the late Mr. Norm Foster. He was, first of all, the first of the members for Sturt in the other place, then became a member of the South Australian Legislative Council. And in 1982, Norm Foster crossed the floor in the state parliament to get uranium mining underway at Olympic Dam in South Australia. And expressing his conscience in support of his state, Norm Foster resigned from the Labor Party, perhaps to avoid being expelled for going against party policy. Thankfully, history and the Labor Party were kinder to him in later years, and he's now hailed as a hero in South Australia. It just goes to show, though, that sometimes groupthink has to be taken on head-on, no matter what the cost. So again, we have today a situation where, when this legislation was created in 1998, a provision was inserted by the Greens to automatically ban certain types of nuclear activity and installations. And before I go on, and I take Senator Ludlam's interjection, he still holds to that view 20 years later. Before I go on, I want to highlight that this is not the end of the debate if the amendment is defeated. It's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. I accept that the government was perhaps housekeeping in this particular legislative area, and then along I came opportunistically with an amendment about nuclear installations. And when you come from South Australia, you take every opportunity that you can. I get that. I also want colleagues to get that when it comes to a nuclear future for South Australia, and I believe my South Australian colleague Senator Edwards, and indeed a number of other coalition senators have offered encouraging words to me in support of this amendment. I and others from South Australia, and no doubt other senators from other states, support a nuclear future and breaking down the barriers to get on with the nuclear fuel cycle and industry for South Australia. There is a Royal Commission has been instituted in South Australia, and to its great credit, State Labor got this underway, a Royal Commission into the nuclear fuel cycle. And we, and that is my party Family First, has welcomed and supported that. I note that it's been reported that the South Australian Government's Attorney-General's Department is already preparing tenders for consultants to bid for the work in preparing business cases for the very things that are described and banned in outright in Section 10 of this Act. So this move is designed to clear and improve the business case for South Australia participating more broadly in the nuclear fuel cycle. And I want to make it clear also that a nuclear spent fuel facility is already permissible at law, though the Greens tried to stop that too in 1998. We need and already have low-level facilities, but these are presently licensed by the authority. I also talk about nuclear submarines. I want to emphasise again that I support nuclear-powered submarines. Again, nuclear-powered submarines, not nuclear-armed submarines. Some of our major allies have nuclear-powered submarines. not least of which are the UK and the United States. Now, the generation of submarines currently under the competitive evaluation process will, of course, be conventional submarines, but I hope that the next generation after that will be nuclear, because there's no doubt that these provide the tactical superiority and particular range that a large and relatively remote nation like Australia needs. Informed opinion tells us that Australia's defence needs are for 12 submarines, 6 conventional and 6 nuclear-powered. Wow. Having a nuclear fuel cycle and industry will greatly improve the prospects of us establishing a nuclear submarine industry, and indeed to develop local talent. We could work, for example, in partnership with, say, the United Kingdom or the United States, and progress towards having our own nuclear industry supporting nuclear-powered submarines. International comparisons. Let me just outline, for the benefit of senators, where Australia presently sits in comparison with its major trading partners when it comes to the types of facilities described in Section 10 of the Act. 33 nations have nuclear power. 19 of those nations have nuclear fuel fabrication. 11 nations have nuclear enrichment plants. There are 7 nations with reprocessing facilities. Australia is one of just 4 out of the 20 G20 nations that does not have nuclear power. 18 of the 34 OECD nations have nuclear power. Australia, of course, is not one of them. So nuclear energy and the fuel cycle is not an international pariah, as some might suggest. In fact, far from it. I want to now move on to consider small modular reactors, which Senator Lionel mentioned a short time ago. I've learnt a little bit about these, this aspect of nuclear energy. Let me tell you about small modular reactors, SMRs for short. In brief, they are, of course, they're small, economically efficient, reliable nuclear energy sources. They are assembled. They do exist, Senator Levin. And then they are assembled in-house and then shipped to the desired locations. They are often they're destined for remote locations, as they require few staff and have fewer containment issues. They employ inherent... I'll get to that, Senator Ludlam, if you don't mind. Thank you. We talked about courteous...
Senator Day, if you could address your questions through the chair and those on my left order.
Senator Ludlam is very close to me here. It's irritating me in my ear as I go along through this, Mr Chair. There are no need for long transmission power lines with these small modular reactors in remote locations. And South Australia, of course, has abundant remote locations. There is a smaller power output relative to the larger power plant. And the initial construction costs are much, much lower by comparisons. SMRs produce between 10 and 300 megawatts, compared to 1,000 megawatts of a typically large reactor. SMRs have load-following designs so that when electricity demands are low, they produce a lower amount of electricity. They're fast reactors and designed to have a higher fuel burn-up rates, reducing the amount of spent fuel produced. And importantly, they use low-enriched uranium, which is non-weapons grade uranium, which makes the fuel less desirable for weapons production and in support of non-proliferation. But for South Australia again, let me talk about the knowledge economy. We're hearing much these days about improving our international competitiveness and giving our own young people reason to stay in Australia, and staying in South Australia in particular. It is a worthwhile debate to have, and that mentality was a driving force behind the Medical Research Future Fund debate. Scientists writing to us, urging us that our best and brightest were going overseas to pursue research opportunities. I asked my colleagues today in this debate, where will the next Albert Einstein come from? Will they be Australian? Where will the next Ernest Rutherford come from, a New Zealander. South Australia has produced a Howard Florey. Will we one day develop the equivalent of a Hadron Collider in South Australia? I have somewhat of a background in science, and I have to say it is very discouraging when you have a law saying that some science is completely off limits, even though you have other nations in the world delivering significant benefits to their citizens. Will we one day celebrate a huge leap forward in scientific technology, like Lockheed Martin is saying they are close to with nuclear fusion, involving a former Australian citizen who went to Britain or somewhere friendlier to do nuclear science? What a shame that would be. We embrace nuclear medicine and its benefits to our health. We ought to be embracing the nuclear fuel cycle also. In conclusion, Mr Chair, I've moved this amendment because it is simply illogical. It's illogical to have a law saying that you simply will not entertain certain technologies. By all means, if you want to impose strict licence conditions, so be it. Do so. We know that regulation rules out a host of other things already because it makes it uneconomic to proceed. Yet it is regulatory extremism to statute ban certain things from ever being considered. The 1998 provision was not opposed by the major parties because they were not looking this far into the future. My amendment is designed to get the Parliament to reconsider the future and vote in favour of the future by supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. In responding to the amendment, can I firstly commend Senator Day for seizing the opportunity to encourage debate around this issue?
Just to sum up, thank you, Mr Chair. I thank my colleagues for their contributions on my amendment, and particularly I'd like to thank my colleague Senator Lionhelm for his support. Just in response to First Senator McLucas suggesting that my amendment would fundamentally change energy policy. I wasn't suggesting that, but rather just remove one of a ban on even considering these things, just the first hurdle. So whether my amendment represented a fundamental change in energy policy, I thank Senator Lucas for her compliment. In response to Senator Ludlam's comments, well, he makes my point exactly. He says, well, there is no nuclear fuel cycle. Well, what have the last 100 years of brilliant discoveries and inventions been all about? We used to burn off gas from oil refineries, and now it's recycled. Methane used to leak out of rubbish dumps, and now it's harnessed and used for fuel. The number of medical breakthroughs. I think Senator Ludlam's short-sighted approach in that, well, we can't allow it because we haven't done anything yet. That is my whole point. That's the whole point about where the next big medical scientific breakthrough might come from. And if we just keep blindly Ludlamite approach, pardon the pun, approach to this, will get nowhere. It certainly, excuse the pun there, Senator Ludlam, it would appear that I don't have the numbers for this to succeed today. I accept that, and that this amendment has come at relatively late notice. But I do thank senators for their contribution. It has triggered an interesting discussion. I will read Senator Ludlam's discussion paper on this, because it really is very, very important for my home state of South Australia. But nonetheless, I would move the amendment. Thank you.